Hello, church. It is so great to see you here in the North Sanctuary, the South Sanctuary, our Speedway campus. Those of you watching online, a shout out today to Susan, who's doing church online today on a boat on Lake Sharp in Pierre, Idaho. We are jealous, but we welcome you nonetheless. Let's give it up to Susan and those who are watching online. Give a hand for yourself. You've chosen a great day to be here, because last week we launched a series called Margin. Margin. Doesn't the word just minister to you alone? Margin. And we're going to spend the next 5 weeks talking about what God says about finding margin in our time. And then we'll turn the corner and spend 5 weeks of what God says about finding margin in our finances as our Financial Peace University groups go through a 9-week session together, finding freedom that God intends for them to have. It's going to be a great season here, not only at Westside, but the other 109 churches in Kansas City that are joining us. Isn't that just absolutely amazing? It's amazing. It's amazing. Well, I want to start off with what the Bible says about finding margin in your time. Anybody interested in that? Anybody worn out just a little bit? Like to find a little breath? Anybody? Yeah, there you go. Well, there was this worn out American investment banker who was unwinding in a little small coastal village in Mexico, and he found himself at a pier, and as he's just relaxing or chillaxing at this pier, a small boat appears or docks with just a solo fisherman in it, and the small boat was filled with several large yellowfin tuna, and the American businessman complimented the solo fisherman on the size of the fish, and he asked him how long it took him to catch the fish. And the Mexican fisherman said, not very long. And he said, well, why don't you fish a little bit longer? And he said, well, it didn't take me that long to catch him. I've caught enough for our family for today. And he said, but why don't you fish a little bit longer? And what do you do with the rest of your day? What do you do with the rest of your time? And the Mexican fisherman says, well, I sleep late and I fish a little, and then I play with my kids, and then I have a siesta with my wife, Maria. And then in the evenings, I take a stroll down into the little village and sip some wine and play the guitar with my amigos. And the guy says, well, I have a Harvard MBA. I'd like to help you. And he says, here's what you can do. If you'll fish a little bit longer, you can take the proceeds and buy a bigger boat. And then from there, you can take the proceeds from the money you've made and then buy a couple of bigger boats. And then from the proceeds of that, you can take and buy a fleet of fishing boats. And then it even gets better than that. He says, then you can stop selling to the middleman and go directly to the processor, and you can one day open up your own cannery, and then you'll be responsible for the product, the processing, and the distribution. Now, eventually you're going to need to move to Mexico City, and then on to LA, and then finally to New York City. And the Mexican fisherman said, well, how long is all that going to take? And he says, well, about 15 to 20 years. He says, well, then what's next? He says, oh, this is where it gets really good. Here's the best part. When the time is right, you'll be able to announce an IPO and sell your company stock to the public and become very, very rich, and you'll make millions. Then what? He says, smiles and says, well, then you'll be able to retire to a small coastal village in Mexico. And you'll be able to sleep late and fish a little and play with your kids and take a siesta with your wife, Maria, and take walks into the village in the evening and sip wine and play your guitar with your amigos. That is how we think in America, right? We overcomplicate something that is already at our disposal. How many people can relate to one of my favorite cartoon captions where the wife is yelling out the back door, Fred, you must learn to relax. Even when you have time to relax, somewhere along the way, you forgot how to do it. Apart from a small population of mostly elderly and retired people, I have discovered that most people in the metropolis of Kansas City are wound up just a little too tight. There's not enough hours in the day to get everything done that you either want to get done or need to get done. You know, there was a time in the distant past where the train would leave your station about once a week, and if you missed the train, you would say, no big deal, I'll catch it next week. And now if we miss even a section in a revolving door, we have a fit, right? There was a time when it would take a week for a piece of mail to arrive at your door, and now in a nanosecond from all over the world, your phone pings you and you salivate like Pavlov's dog to see what mail you have received. We used to check our mail once a day, and now the average person checks their phone every 17 seconds. There was a time when we used to engage in what we now call, particularly in Italy, the slow food movement. We would gather around a table with amazing food and linger with family and friends all evening. And we've traded it for the fast food movement that has led to American obesity that comes with it. We pace in front of a microwave, for crying out loud. Many times, I don't know if you feel like this, but I feel like a hamster on the wheel. I'm expending a lot of energy, but getting nowhere. We said this over and over to you again. We'll continue to do so. Research tells us that the number one catalyst for spiritual growth is Bible engagement with no close second. The number one thing that'll catalyze you to become all that God has designed and desired for you to be is to engage in the Bible. As a matter of fact, this is not only something that you need, but something you want. In Kansas City, research has been done, and we have found that 8 out of every 10 people in Kansas City who go to church wish they knew the Bible more. So why don't they do it? Well, the research in Kansas City shows the number one reason. The number one barrier to people engaging the Bible, are you ready for it? Say it with me. Don't have enough time. Another piece of research that came out just this year shows something about the topic of margin, which we're delving into right now. It says margin drives and predicts generosity of both time and financial giving better than income level. You want to be a generous person? The number one thing keeping you back from it is not making more money. Your thought right now, it's logical, as soon as I make more money, I'm going to be more generous with my time and my money. There is no prediction that you'll do it. As a matter of fact, the stats show the more money you make, actually the smaller percentage you actually give. Not only of your money, but of your time. The greatest predictor of your generosity, the greatest predictor of you executing on God's call for you to be about other people and not yourself is finding margin in both your finances and your time. So in this 5-week study, see if you're up for it, we're going to open up God's word and we're going to find what he says about finding margin in our time. Margin in our time, slaying the margin monster that robs and steals our time and leaves us exhausted and out of breath. Anybody up for that? Anybody up for that? I'm going to begin with a picture that I want to show you that maybe you've never sort of thought of it this way before, okay? And so I'm going to draw a picture of you or someone like you that lives in the busy city of Kansas City. And I need you to help me with this. You can help me here in the North Sanctuary, South Sanctuary, I can hear you. Speedway, I can hear you. And online, just type in your responses to Pastor Jason and the team, and you guys can interact on this as well, okay? I want you to shout out the relational worlds that you manage, groups of people that you engage with, encounter, or manage, sometimes once a day, maybe once a week, once a month, or even relationships that you manage, say, once a year. Okay, you got it? Just relational world. So shout out something. Ready? Family. Okay, good. Work. Someone said a classroom, so that would be like school. Okay. Anything else? Recreation. Okay, call that hobbies. Okay. Friends, not to be confused with these other people. Here. What else? Neighbors. Mostly conflict resolution, but friendships nonetheless. What else? Church. Oh yeah, here we are. Church. Anything else that you can think of? How about kids' activities? Is that an issue here? Okay, all right, I thought so. Hey, you've done an amazing job here, but you have forgotten an obvious one, and I mean no judgment here whatsoever, okay? God, you can have a personal relationship with God, okay? So you look at all these different worlds that you manage, and you can see why you are so exhausted. But now let's ask the question, is this really all of them? Is this really all of them? For example, how many of you, both you and if you're married, your spouse work? Anybody in the room? Anybody? Yeah, a lot of you. So that's 2 Christmas parties to go to in December, 2 separate Christmas parties. Let's take family, for example, your siblings and your parents, okay? Now I have 4, there's 4 of us as siblings, and I have a sister that lives in Ohio. I have a brother that lives in Pennsylvania. I have a sister that lives with her family in San Antonio. Now, my wife is Italian, so fortunately, all of her family and relatives lives in the same neighborhood, which is really helpful for us, you know. Might be a mob involved in all of that. You know, but now for some of you, this is a hard relationship to identify, but not only do you have to manage it, but it's oftentimes very taxing for both you and for both them. Sometimes divorce happens, and it's a very, very difficult relationship to manage. And as George Strait sings, what makes it even more complicated is that all my exes live in Texas, so that makes it really much more complicated, you know. Now, you take school, for example. There was a time with our 4 kids that they were in 4 different schools, and the schools did not coordinate with each other on how to make our life easier. There was 2 different elementary schools, a junior high school, and a high school, okay? Now, take hobbies, for example. I have 3 hobbies. I love antique watches, classic cars, and golf. All 3 of my hobbies share one thing in common. None of them work. None of them work. And what complicates it is there's 3 different relationship groups. The people who like antique watches don't golf. The people who golf don't do classic cars. So I have 3 hobbies, and that just leaves us exhausted. Then Roseanne says, well, I want a hobby. And I says, Roseanne, there's no time for you to have a hobby. So I bought her a tennis racket and says, give that a try, okay? And then we take friends. You know, every time I do this exercise, when people say friends, they do it every single time, and I'm thinking, who are you talking about here? These are people that you used to have a category for, used to go to school with them or work, but one of you moved, and you made a commitment that you're going to stay up with each other, but after about 6 months, you know, it's really, really challenging, so they get your annual Christmas letter, or these are your Facebook friends, which is just very, very How many people struggle to stay up with Facebook these days? It's just on and on and on. Now, let me land for just a moment at kids' activities, okay? Now, I haven't been here very long, and we had already raised our kids by the time we got here, so I'm not really sure this is an issue in Kansas City, your kids being involved in activities. You help me. I'm going to make an assumption here. That if you have 3 kids, that you have the discipline to limit them to 1 activity a year. Would that be fair? Not fair. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to keep drawing circles, and then until you just get sick to your stomach and you say, please stop. Just when someone says stop, I'll stop. Keep going. Yeah, keep going. Okay. I mean, it's crazy, right? And then you take a church, for example. You ask yourself the question, is church really just one circle of relationships to manage? And what we've learned from our research is that if you move into an area and you want to get connected to a church, that in most churches, it's going to take about 5 different circles for you and your kids and your spouse to manage to feel a sense of connection. Mom's in her group, dad's in her group, kids are in the youth group, kids are, those kinds of things. About 5 different groups to manage. So here's a couple things that we're going to learn from this, okay? Social specialists tell us that the average American family living in suburbia manages 35 separate relationship worlds. 35. The second thing we also know is that about linear friendships. Let me put it exactly so you can fill in the blank. Linear friendships. Specialists call this linear type of friendships because there's lines protruding from you to other people. The people who live in one world don't know the people who live in the other worlds. And see, that really creates a problem. If you don't know the problem that it creates, at your next birthday party, invite one person from each of the worlds to it and just realize how stressful it is to manage because they won't want to talk to each other. They only know you. And we also know that over time in this way of life, you play a different character in each of these circles to the point that over time, you've actually forgotten who the real you actually is. Now, don't even get me started on commuting to these different circles. Commuting to these different circles. The amount of time that you spend in the automobile, which is very stressful. Robert Putnam, Harvard University, wrote a book several years ago called Bowling Alone, and he came up with this very important statistic. For every 10 minutes you spend in an automobile, you reduce your available social capital by 10%. That's a fancy way of saying that every 10 minutes you spend in a car, you reduce your available time for meaningful relationships by 10%, which means for many of us, we're not only struggling with relationships, but we're going into social debt every single day. The reality is, life hasn't always been this way. And we've been able to kind of trace it back to sort of the key catalyst. And it came in the 1950s when President Dwight Eisenhower went over to Germany and was mesmerized by the superhighway system that Adolf Hitler created called the Autobahn. He came back into America and created our superhighway system, which has created tremendous economic value for us, but it did something to rob us of deep, meaningful community and introduced a word that is so prevalent in the American lifestyle that we don't even know that we don't even know. The word is fragmentation. We can get into a car and fragment our lives and create these 35 different worlds. Now, if you were born before 1955-56, you may recall a time when life was different. You may recall a time when things were not so hectic. But if you were born after 1955, there is a really good chance you don't even know that you don't know that there is actually an alternative to this crazy way of life. Now, social specialists have put a label to this kind of lifestyle, which represents probably most of the people I'm talking to. They call it crowded loneliness. Doesn't that sound right? Crowded loneliness. It's a very deceptive form of loneliness because we don't see ourselves as lonely because we're around so many people every single day. As a matter of fact, in human history, a human being would only actually see 100 people in their entire lifetime. And now we see thousands of people. And how could it be that there is a crowded loneliness? Crowded loneliness is being exposed to tons of people, but not having a deep connection with any one of them. You can't stay very long in any one of these circles to get to really know the person that's in that circle before you have to jolt out and get to another one. George Gallup Jr. of the Gallup poll did a large study on the American way of life. And he came up with this very alarming but factual reality about American lifestyle. He said, Americans are the loneliest people on the planet. The loneliest people on the planet. You say, how could this possibly be? And the reason that we don't think of our dilemma as loneliness is we don't start tackling a real challenge in our life. It is a deceptive, harried way of life, but God has a solution. In Genesis chapter 2 and verse 18, after 6 days of creating, God creates Adam in the garden and looks back and he says these famous words, "It is not good for the man to be alone." In the first 6 days of creation, God creates, steps back, and he says, it is good. And on this final day, he creates Adam, sees them alone in the garden, and it's the only time he says it's not good. Now, God did not make an oops. This was not a design flaw on God's part. I believe he did it purposefully this way to send us a message that it is not good for you to be alone. I pre-wired you for community. He is sending us a message. Now, it would seem to me to bear out that if God said it's not good for man to be alone, and we are living in the loneliest country on the planet, then if people have lived alone for an extended period of time, crowded loneliness, then it should show up negatively in the outcome of their life, emotionally, spiritually, physically, and even financially. So I've done a lot of research on this topic, and all you need to do is just go Google social isolation and stress or health, and you will not get to the end of the research that's been done before you need to go to bed at night. I just picked out a couple of the most alarming ones for me related to our physical health. Here's one. A California study involving 7,000 men and women found that after 9 years, those with the fewest social ties were twice as likely to die. Twice as likely to die as those with the strongest ones. Another research study shows that a lack of social support is linked to higher death rates for heart attacks, diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, and other autoimmune disorders. But here's my favorite one of all. The study says, another well-documented study shows that social isolation contributes to illness and death as much as smoking. Wow. So if you must smoke, for goodness sakes, don't do it alone. Just kidding. Here's the deal. We were created by God for community. And when we do not have the kind of community God created us for, it literally begins the process of killing us. Whenever we do have the kind of community that God created us for, as Adam finally did after he created Eve and he stepped back, he says it's not only good, but it is very good. Crowded loneliness, folks, wake up. It is killing us. But here's the deal. We are introducing this way of life to our children earlier than we did. And the research is showing that we are creating all kinds of illnesses and issues in their life. We get them busy, what we believe is for their sake, but in reality, we are slowly poisoning our children. But God has a solution to all of this. Can I get an amen? Amen. Ephesians chapter 5, verses 15 through 18 reads this way. Look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of your time because the days are evil. That phrase, making the best use of your time, is the Greek word exagorazo, and it can be translated to redeem or to buy back. God is inviting us, in light of the evil that is in our day, that we don't just wake up and let the day unfold or say yes to everything, but rather as wise people, we look at taking back control of our time and making sure that we have aligned our time to fulfill the will of God, which most certainly includes making room for Him and making room for rich relationships with other people. Now, what I'd like to do is I would like to hire you as consultants, because this is my life right here. It's just a mess. And I need you to help me get out of this. And so I've hired all of you. And I need you to just help me by shouting out like one-word solutions to my problem, okay? So help me, please. What kind of advice would you give me? Ready?
Turn off the phone.
Turn off the phone. Good. Turn off phone. Okay, what else? Take a nap. Don't wake up. What else? Say no. That's good. Wait a minute, you guys are killing it. What, another one? Prioritize. Best consultants I have ever hired. Anything else? Pray. Pray. Spiritual one in the bunch. You get no brownie points for that. What else? Read the Bible. Just got to find time to do it. Okay? Go fishing. Fishing. Date night. Okay? Did I hear the word eliminate? Yes. Eliminate circles. That would be good. Absolutely. Anything else? Turn off the TV. Okay. Consolidate. Oh. Okay, so this is the advice you have given me to exit the crazy world of crowded loneliness. And like any consultant, you're not responsible for actually helping me do this. You're just paid to give me advice. And you've done really well. But the reality is, this is a lot harder to pull off, isn't it, than it appears. I mean, let's take the word like eliminate, for example. Take your mother-in-law. You call her up on the phone this afternoon and you say, mother-in-law, I was at church today and I was very, very convicted that I'm not spending enough time with your daughter, and the pastor suggested that I need to eliminate some relationships, and well, I don't know how to say this, but you're out. I mean, it's very difficult once you get into this way of life to exit it, okay? Now, one of my personal, I think, most effective ways to pull this off is, as someone yelled out the word consolidate. Write down the word consolidate. This is one of the most practical piece of advices. And basically, by consolidating, you're looking at taking these circles and you're looking at bringing them together, okay? Consolidating the circles together, okay? So I'm going to give you 5 pieces of advice. The first one is this. I want you, we're going to put that up on the board here. Here's what we want you to do. Number 1, get more people into your circle who not only know you, but know each other, okay? Not only know you, but know each other. And what you're wanting to do is creating a circle where the people, here's you, and here's another person in one of your other circles, and here's another person. And here's the deal. They not only know you, but they know each other, okay? So you sit down and you draw out your crowded loneliness circles and begin to say, how can I consolidate these where the people not only know me, but they know each other? Number 2, now this is what Roseanne and I did. There may be several ways to do this. In the coming weeks, I'm going to tell you our journey of how we pull this off out of a very deep crisis in my life. But here's advice number 2. Draw a 1-mile radius around your house and do as much living in that circle as you can. Okay? Kids' schools, kids' sports, hobbies, shopping, all of it. The proximity will not only keep you out of the car more, but also will enhance the opportunity for spontaneity and frequency in your relationships, okay? Because you're going to see the same people in these same places if you just park yourself there more often. Simplify your life, stay out of the car. Number 3, this is really important. Again, there's several ways to do it, but this is the way we did it. Get into or form a small group with fellow Christians who live within this radius. Okay, so you're taking this very important Christian community and you're consolidating within this circle where you're doing all of these other things. This is what Roseanne and I have done, even here in Kansas City. The best small groups are not ones that only see each other at the weekly event, but you see each other naturally or organically in the spaces in between. Sometimes when I'll take my trash out on a Thursday night, I will see a neighbor that's in my small group, and it's actually the spontaneous conversation we've had at taking the trash out that's more meaningful than the conversation we've had in the small group. You're wanting to create depth and spontaneity and frequency. The next one is, which we've already talked about, is eliminate a few circles. Eliminate a few circles. It's interesting, when C.S. Lewis first visited the United States from England, he was taken back by the frantic pace of life that we created for ourselves. And he wrote a book targeted to women. It's a book entitled Letters to an American Lady. And this is what C.S. Lewis women had to say about you. It applies to us men as well, after he saw the way you live. Here's what he wrote. Don't be too easily convinced that God really wants you to do all sorts of work you needn't do. Each must do his duty in the state of life to which God has called him. What feels like zeal may only be fidgets or even flattering of one's self-importance. By doing what one's station and its duties does not demand, one can make oneself less fit for the duties it does demand, and so commit some injustice. What C.S. Lewis is saying is, women, men, the activities that you have overstuffed your life with, they're not bad in and of themselves. Where they become bad or harmful is that those things that you are not called to do, you shouldn't be doing, are keeping you from the very things that in fact you should be doing. And that is where the sin is committed. And so you need to ruthlessly get in and discover what is God calling you to do, and you alone, and eliminate the other circles. The final one is this: trade events for more walks and time on the front porch. Can I get an amen? Sign up for less events and leave more room for taking a walk or just sitting on the front porch and wasting the evening away. I want to give you permission today, spiritual authority, to say no. Say no. No. Try it again. Say no. No. Now take your little finger and go like, no. No. Dr. Will Miller wrote a book several years ago that really captures the essence of the kind of relationships that God really wired us for. The title of the book is simply Refrigerator Rights. Refrigerator rights. What he says in the book from his research is, in America, we don't need more relationships. We need a different kind of relationships. The kind of relationships where you grant people the rights to your refrigerator without even asking. Let me ask you a question. How many people will walk into your home without knocking and will help themselves to your refrigerator without permission? You see, when you have those kinds of friendships where you're not hosting them, they're not events, they're just accessing your life, then you are in the process of having the kind of relationships. If you've ever watched the show Seinfeld, Kramer had refrigerator rights with Jerry Seinfeld, or Joey had refrigerator rights in Friends, for you who are slightly younger than me. Or you want to be in a spot, as Cheers says, where everybody knows your name. So here's my challenge for you, okay? I'm going to do a little test here, and you tell me which one is clearer. This one or this one? This one or this one? This one or that one? 2020 vision. We want to give you permission to take back control of your life. We live in a crazy world, and we want you to be able to stick up your finger and say, that's enough. I'm not drinking your Kool-Aid anymore. This is going to be a bold step, a countercultural step. But we envision folks all over Kansas City trading the lines of crowded loneliness for the rich circle of community. People drawing lines around their neighborhoods, parking their cars, sitting on the front porch, wasting the evening away with family and friends, gathering for slow food meals around the table, taking more walks, and really getting to know the people God has sovereignly placed in your life. But it's not going to happen overnight. For Roseanne, and we'll share this in the weeks to come, after hitting a crisis in my life, it took us 2 years to find the rhythm that we felt would bring health to us and to our children. God says it's not good for the man to be alone. But when we find that rich circle of community where we've made room for him, we've made room for a few other people, God says it's not only good, it's not only good, say it with me, church, but it is. And all God's people said,